My youngest daughter called me at 4:30 in the morning. "Dad, don't go to work today. Trust me." I didn't understand and asked again. "By noon, you'll understand," she said. I was confused, but snorts, still listened. Something deep down told me I ought to. At 11 a.m., the police called. In that moment, it all became clear my daughter had known what was coming. If I'd walked through that door at work that morning, I would have stepped right into the trap. I'm truly grateful you're here with me today. Welcome to Calm Family Revenge. I'm glad you found your way here. Before we go any further, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you listening from today, and what time is it there? There's something about knowing that people across so many different places are sitting quietly with a story like this one that means a lot to me. A note before we begin: some details in this story have been shaped for storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to specific real individuals is coincidental. The truth it carries, though, that part is very real. Please note, this story includes some fictional elements for storytelling and learning purposes. Names and settings may be coincidental, but the message is meant to stay with you. Sleep has never come easily to me since Nadine left this world. 3 years of still, empty nights will reshape a man that way, sharpening your hearing until every sound the house makes registers: the groan of floorboards settling, a branch dragging itself across the bedroom glass in the October dark. So when the phone on my nightstand blazed to life and split the silence with that hard, persistent ring, I was already most of the way awake before it finished its first cycle. My hand found it before my mind caught up. 4:30 in the morning, the clock said. Claire's name glowed on the screen. She never called at this hour. 29 years on this earth, and I could number on one hand the times that girl had reached out to me before daylight, and each one of those occasions had carried real weight. A car accident on the highway outside San Antonio. A friend rushed to the hospital the night she couldn't hold in. The news that she'd passed her nursing certification, and the relief had made sleep impossible. Claire was not the kind of person who dialed her father in the middle of the night on a whim. I brought the phone to my ear and eased upright, the old bed frame announcing itself the way it always does. "Dad." Her voice arrived right away, kept low, pulled tight, every syllable deliberate, the way a person talks when they're measuring what they let out. "Dad, please don't go to work today. Just trust me. By noon, you'll understand." I lowered the phone and stared at it, half certain something had gotten lost between her mouth and my ear. Then I lifted it again. "Claire, what's going on? Are you all right?" "I'm okay." A pause. Her breathing came through choppy and thin, the way it sounds when someone is managing not to let you hear that they've been in tears. "I just need you to stay home today. Don't go to the shop. Please, Dad." "Yes, sweetheart. I can't just call out on a Monday morning without a reason. Clyde's got 3 cars coming in for today." Her voice fell even lower, barely above a whisper. "Please." Just that. One word delivered in a tone I had never in her life heard from her. I raised Claire inside these walls, watched a quiet, solemn little girl become a quiet, solemn woman who wore her mother's eyes and carried her mother's iron, unmoving composure. I had seen Claire keep vigil at Nadine's hospital bedside for 6 days running and never waver. I had stood beside her at the graveside on a bitter February morning in 2020 and watched her hold the pieces of herself together while everyone around her came undone. Claire didn't crumble. Claire didn't breathe in hushed tones like a woman cornered by something she was afraid to name. "Okay," I said. "Okay, I'll stay home." The breath she let out through the phone was long and measured the release of someone who has been carrying a weight well before this call began. "Thank you, Dad. I'll explain everything. I promise." Then she was gone. I stayed on the edge of the mattress a while, phone resting in my palm screen, fading out the room, pulling itself back into that hour before dawn hush. Down the street, a dog put up one bark and reconsidered. I found my robe, moved to the kitchen, and clicked on the light over the sink, the one that throws a warm yellow cast across the backsplash tile that Nadine had spent 3 weekends picking out at a tile showroom. Coffee, the same way my father taught me, at 12 water, brought just shy of boiling. While it brewed, I typed a quick note to Clyde telling him I'd be out. He had kept Hartwell and Sons auto repair running smoothly for 11 years. One Monday off the floor wouldn't sink anybody. I filled a mug and brought it to the kitchen table. That's when the photograph on the wall caught me, the one Nadine had framed and put up herself the Christmas before things began to change. The 4 of us in the backyard on an August afternoon, all squinting a little into the sun. Nadine in her yellow dress. Pamela laughing at something beyond the frame's edge, head tipped all the way back, unself-conscious as a child. Claire tucked against my shoulder with her arm looped through mine the way she did back when she was small and still believed her father was capable of solving anything. I stood with the warmth of the mug against my palms and took in that image. I tried to pinpoint the last time things had actually felt that open, that unguarded, the way a family feels when nobody is performing. Before Nadine's health began its slow decline, before Pamela moved out to Friendswood, before Sunday meals started arriving, weighted down by everything nobody said, before I began to notice the glances Claire and Nadine would trade across the table without ever letting me in on what they meant. I reached for some memory, a genuine 1-4 people in a room who loved each other without effort or obligation. I settled into my chair, both hands around the mug, and kept my eyes on that photograph. The morning sat gray and motionless around me. The refrigerator droned. A car rolled past on the street unhurried. Off somewhere in the distance, a train horn stretched itself out low and long over the flat Texas ground, the same as it did at this hour every morning, the same as it had for every year I had lived inside this house. My phone lay face down on the table. Claire had asked me to trust her, and whatever she was carrying that she hadn't yet handed me, I was prepared to wait right here until she did. 67 years have a way of teaching you that the understanding that the answers with any real weight don't come to men who go chasing them. They come to men who get quiet enough to let them arrive. One last look at the photograph. Nadine's smile, Pamela laughing. Claire leaning into me and sitting alone in a kitchen designed for a fuller house. I realized I had no clear memory of the last occasion all 4 of us occupied the same room, and it actually resembled that image. October mornings in Texas have a character of their own, spread out, unhurried, not quite cool enough to announce fall, not warm enough to pass for summer's last gasp, just still, just waiting. The coffee had gone cold before I finally rose from the table and crossed to the window over the sink. The yard looked back at me the same as it always had. The magnolia tree in the far left corner that Nadine had planted the year we moved in the wooden fence, Wendell Jr. from 2 doors down, had helped me put up one Saturday in 2002. The 2 of us working our way through cold drinks with a radio station playing old blues music, the garden beds running along the south wall where Nadine had coaxed tomatoes out of the ground every summer until her body stopped allowing it. 35 years spent inside a yard that size, and you lose the ability to really see it. You no longer catch the way early light filters through the magnolia branches, or notice how the dew lingers in the corners where the shade is deepest. Familiarity does that makes a thing invisible the same way your own hands are invisible, present and known, well past the point where you actually look. This life had been assembled choice by choice, stretching back long before this house existed, long before Pearland, long before any of it took the shape it holds today. Spring of 1983, 27 years old, $400 in a checking account, a collection of tools my father had willed to me, and a single leased bay inside a garage off the South Loop Freeway in Houston. That was the origin of Hartwell and Sons Auto Repair. No ribbon, no ceremony, just a sign I lettered by hand and a handshake with a landlord willing to bet on a young man whose only real asset was that he intended to work harder than anyone else in the room. Nadine painted those letters on the sign. Her hands were steadier than mine. Steadier than everything about me, honestly, if I'm willing to say it plainly. Pamela arrived in 1981, 2 years ahead of the shop, when Nadine and I were young enough to be convinced that loving each other was all the preparation raising a child required. Pamela entered the world with volume and certainty, and neither of those qualities ever softened. Pamela grew up inside that shop on weekends, spreading her homework across the waiting room chairs, learning the name of every tool before she could reliably tie her own shoes. Those were good years, uncomplicated years, the kind you don't truly value until they're behind you. Claire arrived 13 years later in the summer of 1994 and caught all of us off guard, her mother included. Nadine wept when she found out, not from anxiety, she explained to me later, but from the particular gladness of receiving something you hadn't known to want. Claire was quieter than Pamela from the very beginning, more watchful, the sort of child who took stock of a room before deciding to enter it. Nadine used to say Claire had come into the world already knowing things. Hal Kenway walked through the shop door in the spring of 1993, looking for bookkeeping work, and wound up staying 30 years. He was a compact, careful man, good with numbers, with a laugh that expanded to fill whatever space he occupied. We became the kind of friends who don't need much tending. 3 weeks could pass without a word between us, and we'd pick right back up mid-sentence. In some ways, he understood my business better than I did, which months ran tight, which customers repaid the trouble, which vendors had started quietly inflating their invoices. I trusted Hal Kenway the way you trust someone who has stood at your side long enough to know exactly where the soft spots are, and has never once thought to press on them. I had shaped my life around people of that kind, steady people. People whose word meant something, which is part of why Pamela's gradual changes were so difficult to account for. She had always been the one who phoned every Sunday, who turned up early for every holiday, who remembered every birthday and put a card in the actual mail the way Nadine had raised her to do. After she married Garrett Colton in the spring of 2016, something in that pattern started to give way. Gradually at first, a missed Sunday here, a holiday cut short there. I reasoned it was adjustment, the natural recalibration that comes when a person starts a new household and has to weigh old loyalties against new ones. Nadine and I had gone through the same thing early in our own marriage. Everyone does. But the calls kept thinning out, and when Pamela did appear, she seemed distracted physically, present mentally, somewhere else. Her answers clipped a beat short, her laughter arriving just a fraction too quickly. Her eyes would find Garrett whenever a conversation developed any kind of edge. She stopped finishing her thoughts around him. Not the way a settled couple finishes each other's sentences, but the way someone has trained themselves to pull back before going too far. I noticed. I told myself I was seeing things that weren't there. I told myself Garrett was a decent man who worked hard and looked after my daughter, that whatever distance had opened between Pamela and the rest of us was ordinary and would close on its own. I had been repeating some version of that to myself for 7 years, sitting in my kitchen, the morning pushing toward 9 o'clock. I found myself wondering how long a man can keep telling himself a story before the story starts to feel like something other than the truth. The clock above the stove rolled to 8:45. I turned from the window, and in that particular quiet, the way memory sometimes surfaces when you stop steering it, a voice reached me with perfect clarity. Nadine's voice from somewhere in those last weeks before she was gone. We had been together in the bedroom the February afternoon. light, low, and golden the way it gets that time of year. And she had reached across and taken my hand and said the way she always said the things that mattered plainly, without preamble, looking straight at me. "Promise me you'll always listen to Claire. She sees things clearly, Eugene. She always has." I pressed her hand and told her of course I would. I didn't ask her why she felt the need to say it. I assumed it was the kind of thing a mother says when she is beginning to think about leaving her children behind. A general instruction. A piece of motherly wisdom meant to cover the ground she wouldn't be there to cover herself. Standing in my kitchen, on a quiet Monday morning, 3 years later, with Claire's phone call still pressing heavy against my chest, I understood for the first time that Nadine had not been speaking in generalities at all. The memory came back the way certain memories do, not gradually, but all at once, like a door swinging wide the moment the latch finally lets go. September of 2016. A Thursday evening, Pamela had called 2 days prior to say she wanted to bring someone to dinner, that it mattered that she hoped I'd go in with an open mind. She said that last part twice. I noted it and said nothing. I spent those 2 days insisting to myself that I had no expectations. I wasn't convincing myself. Garrett Colton came through my front door at 6:15 carrying a bottle of bourbon, wearing a smile that fit his face the way expensive clothes fit a man who has always owned them easy, unforced, as though it had never entered his mind to be anything other than comfortable in his own skin. He was 37 years old, broad-shouldered, well-dressed, without making a production of it, with the kind of firm handshake that men of a certain generation were taught to offer a woman's father. He met my eyes directly and said it was an honor to meet me. He used the word honor. Over dinner, he asked about the shop, not the polite surface-level questions a man asks when he's biding his time until he can speak about himself, but real ones, specific ones, questions that suggested he'd done some preparation. He asked about the pressures facing independent auto repair shops in a market being slowly taken over by dealership service departments. He asked how I had held on to long-term employees in a trade where people rarely stayed. He said what I had built over 40 years was precisely the kind of business this country needed more of. Small, honest, built on a handshake. I liked him. I want to be clear about that. I liked him in an honest way, the way you warm to a man who seems to recognize the things you are proudest of and understands exactly what they're worth. Pamela watched Garrett speak, the way you watch something you've been carrying a long time and have finally found the right moment to set down in front of someone. There was pride in her face, and something else beneath it that I didn't have a name for at the time. I took it for happiness. That evening, after Garrett and Pamela had gone and the dishes were done and the house had begun to settle into its nighttime quiet, Nadine sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for a moment before she spoke. I recognized that look. It meant she had been holding something back all evening and had made up her mind to let it out. "Well, he's too perfect, Eugene." She said not harshly, just directly, the way Nadine always said the things she meant. Nobody is that perfect. Men who work that hard at making a good impression are usually working at it for a reason. I told her she was being careful to the point of unfairness, that Garrett was a good man who clearly loved Pamela, and that maybe we ought to feel grateful rather than wary. Nadine looked at me a moment, then gave a slow nod, the one she used when she had already decided I was wrong, but had chosen to let the conversation close for now. She didn't return to it that night. She didn't tell me I was right either. The wedding was in April of 2017, at a venue in Friendswood, white flowers and late afternoon light angling through tall windows. Pamela was radiant the way brides are meant to be, and I walked the aisle beside her with that particular pride fathers carry at such moments, immense and bittersweet in equal measure. Garrett stood at the front, hands clasped, watching Pamela come toward him with an expression that looked from where I stood like a man who had arrived at something he had worked carefully to obtain. I took that for love. I thought that was what love looked like on a man who kept his feelings close. The signs came afterward, and they came without noise. Garrett had opinions about the shop that he offered, without being invited to suggestions about refinancing, restructuring, which vendors Eugene was probably overpaying. He framed every one of them as being in my interest, delivering them with the same unhurried confidence he brought to everything. Whenever Pamela and I found our way into a conversation, with any real depth to it, Garrett had a way of appearing a refill that needed fetching, a question that pulled the thread in a different direction. A hand resting gently on Pamela's shoulder that somehow closed whatever we had been moving toward. I noticed it. I cataloged it under the heading of a son-in-law still learning where the boundaries were, still finding his footing in the family. And then there was the way Pamela herself had begun to change. Gradual at first. A shorter answer where a longer one would have come naturally before. A glance toward Garrett before a sentence reached its end. Small compressions, small silences, none of them troubling on their own. Nadine had registered all of this well before I was willing to. In her last winter, during one of the quiet afternoons we spent together in the bedroom, when she no longer had the energy to be anywhere else, she had turned her head on the pillow and fixed me with that particular directness she kept for the things that mattered most, and said, "Watch over Pamela, and let Claire watch over you." Her voice was soft, but her eyes were entirely clear. I told her I would. I held her hand and said everything was going to be fine, the way you say things to the people you love, when saying anything else is simply beyond you. I had taken those words as a general instruction, the parting wish of a woman who was preparing to leave and wanted to know the people she loved would look after each other. Sitting in my living room now, the morning light flat and gray through the front window, the coffee in my hand gone cold. Long since I turned those words over and heard them differently. Not general, specific. Nadine had seen something I had spent 7 years manufacturing reasons to overlook, and she had done the only thing within her power. She had told Claire, and she had told me, and she had trusted that one of us would eventually grasp what she meant. The clock on the mantel read 9:10. I set the cold cup down on the side table, rolled my neck, and thought about getting up to brew another pot, because waiting is easier when your hands have something to do. And then my phone rang. Not Claire. The name on the screen was Hal Kenway. I had known Hal for 30 years, and in that time I had come to know his voice in every register. It was capable of loose and laughing, clipped with irritation, worn down with tiredness, weighted with something serious. What came through when I answered was none of those. It was measured, controlled in the precise way of a man who is putting considerable effort into sounding like nothing has gone wrong. 30 years teaches you things that words leave unsaid. "Hey there," Hal said. Just those 2 words, and I heard it immediately. A flatness beneath the casual opener, the sound of a man delivering lines he had rehearsed on the drive over to making a call he hadn't wanted to make. I had known Hal Kenway since the days when we were both younger and less careful about everything. I knew the way his voice lifted when a number came out better than expected, the way his laugh went loose and sudden when something genuinely caught him off guard, the way he went quiet when something was sitting on him, and he hadn't yet decided whether to put it into words. None of that was what I was hearing. What I was hearing was performance. "Hal," I said, "what's going on?" It wasn't really a question the way I said it. He understood that. There was a pause on his end, long enough to tell me everything I needed to know about whether this was going to be a straightforward conversation. I heard him draw a slow breath in, then release it. "I just wanted to check in," he said. See how your morning was going. My morning is fine, Hal. Another pause, shorter but heavier. Check your mailbox, Eugene. His voice had pulled low, gone careful. There might be something from the bank. I think you need to look at it before you do anything else today. And before a single word could make it out of my mouth, before I could ask him which bank, what, something, why, he sounded like a man, standing at the rim of something he didn't want to peer into the line cut out. He had ended the call. I stood in the living room, holding the phone, and stared at it, the way you stare at something that has just stopped making sense. 30 years. 30 years of Monday morning check-ins and fishing trips that were mostly just reasons to sit somewhere quiet and let important things go unsaid. 30 years of Hal walking into my office at the shop, dropping into the chair across from my desk, and telling me straight what he thought about whatever was in front of us. Hal Kenway did not hang up on people. Hal Kenway did not speak in careful, rehearsed sentences. Hal Kenway did not tell you to check your mailbox and then vanish before you could ask a single follow-up. I walked to the front door and opened it. The morning air came in cool and damp, carrying the smell of fresh-cut grass from somewhere down the block. At the end of the front walk sat the old wooden mailbox painted dark green that Nadine had picked out at a yard sale because she liked the shape of it. I had given her grief about driving all that way for a mailbox. She had told me I had no eye for things built to last. She hadn't been wrong about that. One envelope inside. White standard business size, the return address of Lone Star Community Bank, printed in the upper left corner. I carried it back inside and stood in the entryway looking at it for a moment before I broke the seal. My name on the front, my address, everything correct and ordinary. The letter ran 3 pages. The language was formal and dense the way bank correspondence always is. Reference numbers, account identifiers, phrases like pursuant to the terms of and as per the executed agreement. I worked through the first paragraph twice before the meaning of it started to take shape. Then I went back to the beginning and read it all the way through slowly this time. The house at this address, the house Nadine and I had moved into in 1988, where Pamela had learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway, and Claire had taken her first steps in the hallway just past the kitchen, had been refinanced 3 weeks prior. A new mortgage had been drawn against the property at 80% of its assessed value. The paperwork had been signed and submitted. The transaction had been processed and recorded. Per the borrower's instructions, notification of this transaction had been routed to an address in Friendswood for the preceding 30 days. This letter was being sent to the property address, as Texas state banking law required, after 30 days had elapsed. My signature appeared at the bottom of the reference documents. My name in my handwriting on a line I had no memory of standing over. I remembered the dinner. I remembered the way Garrett had pushed the papers across the table with an easy, almost offhand explanation. Just a refinancing better rate, nothing complicated, standard stuff. I remembered Pamela sitting beside him, nodding lightly the way she might nod if someone remarked that the weather was looking good for the weekend. I remembered thinking that Garrett had a solid grasp of this kind of thing, that it was useful to have someone in the family who understood financial matters, that it was good Pamela had someone looking out for her that way. I remembered signing. I could not remember reading. Hal had spoken with Garrett sometime in the previous month, a casual exchange, Garrett asking questions about how the shop handled its banking correspondence, Hal answering without suspecting a thing. Hal had mentioned it to me in passing weeks ago, the kind of small detail you register and immediately set aside as meaningless. Only now, standing in my own entryway with this letter open in my hands, did the shape of what that question had actually been become fully clear. Garrett had needed to know how much time he had before the bank was obligated to deliver notification to this address. He had used that window deliberately. He had mapped out that window before he ever laid those papers on my dinner table. I stood there a long time. 3 pages, every word of them, read every sentence understood, and still some part of me kept reaching for an explanation that would make this into something other than what it plainly was. The floor felt different beneath me. Not unsteady exactly, just different. The way something feels when a thing that has always been solid quietly reclassifies itself as something you can no longer count on. My signature, my house, 35 years of mortgage payments and upkeep and small repairs, and the memories of a life assembled inside these walls, and my own name on a document I had never read, signed over a plate of Pamela's chicken casserole, while Garrett refilled everyone's water glass. The phone in my hand buzzed and lit up. An incoming call from a number I didn't recognize, Houston area code, nothing I knew. I looked at it a moment, then I answered. Mr. Hartwell. The voice on the other end was measured and professional, the kind of voice trained to deliver difficult information without letting feeling get out ahead of the facts. This is Detective Boyd Rafferty with the Houston Police Department. I'm sorry to contact you under these circumstances. I need to ask you a few questions about your business, Hartwell and Sons Auto Repair. I moved to the armchair near the front window and sat down. The bank letter was still in my other hand. I placed it face down on the side table without looking at it again. Go ahead, I said. Detective Rafferty laid it out plainly. There had been an incident at my shop earlier that morning. A worker had been injured, not seriously, he was quick to add, but enough to need medical attention and trigger a mandatory report. In the course of that report, safety inspectors had reviewed the shop's compliance records and found several violations filed under my name, violations that pointed to a pattern of negligence stretching back several months. I told him that wasn't possible. I told him I ran a clean operation, that we had cleared every inspection for 4 decades, that whatever those records showed, something in them was wrong. Detective Rafferty paused. The way investigators pause when they are about to say something they already know will land hard. Mr. Hartwell, our records show that your access card was used to enter the building at 8:03 this morning. Is that accurate? No, I said. That is not accurate. I have been at home since before 5 o'clock this morning. I never went in. Another pause. Is there anyone who can verify that for you, sir? I lifted my eyes from the side table and took in the room around me. The armchair I was sitting in. The lamp in the corner that Nadine had bought at an antique shop in Kama. The front door closed and locked the street beyond the window, quiet and empty in the mid-morning light. The house as still as it always was these days, with only me inside it. No, I said. I live alone. I drove to the shop. I don't recall making a deliberate decision to do so. I simply found myself reaching for my jacket, picking up my keys, and walking out the front door. The way the body sometimes moves ahead of the mind when the mind is still working to accept something it doesn't fully want to face. The shop was a 20-minute drive on a clear morning. I made it in 15. I turned into the lot and pulled into my usual spot near the side entrance and sat in the truck for a moment, looking through the windshield at a scene that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. 2 vehicles I had never seen before were parked near the main bay doors. A man I didn't recognize was standing by the entrance, talking with one of my long-term workers, a clipboard in hand, writing things down. And there, near the corner of the building, speaking in a low and practiced voice to the reportedly injured worker, was a man in a gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. I recognized that suit. I had seen it at my dinner table. It was Garrett's attorney, a man named Hale, who worked out of an office in Friendswood, and whose name I had heard exactly once before mentioned in passing at a family dinner as the person who handled Garrett's business matters. He was already here, already talking, already managing the situation, before I had even known there was a situation to manage, before Detective Rafferty had finished his phone call with me. Garrett's legal representation had been standing on my property. There is only one way a lawyer arrives at a scene before the man who owns the building does. He had to have known it was coming. I sat in my truck and turned that over carefully. Garrett had planned for today. Not responded to it, planned for it. The access card that had logged an entry at 8:03 was mine, which meant someone had gotten close enough to that card to copy the chip. The kind of reader that does that is small enough to disappear inside a jacket pocket. You could lean across a man at a dinner table, reach past him for the salt, and have his card cloned before the breadbasket came back around. I thought about how many dinners Garrett had attended, how many times he had sat close enough to reach across me for something. The injured worker, I could see him from where I sat. A younger man I didn't immediately place, perched on a crate near the side wall while Hale spoke to him. Someone brought in on a short-term basis, hired through a placement service. The kind of arrangement that puts enough distance between whoever gave the instructions and whoever carried them out, that the trail becomes complicated in a hurry. If I had come to work this morning the way I had come in every Monday morning for 40 years, I would have walked through that door at 8 o'clock and found whatever had been set up waiting for me. My card in the log, my name on the safety violations, my shop, my liability, my signature on everything. Claire had told me not to come in. I pulled out my phone and called Pamela. She answered on the second ring, which struck me as fast, the kind of fast that suggests someone has been expecting a particular call. Dad. Her voice was even composed in a way that didn't quite fit the weight of what I was calling about. I heard there was something at the shop this morning. Are you okay? Pamela Garrett's attorney is standing in my parking lot right now. He was here before I even knew what had happened. Can you tell me how that's possible? There was the smallest pause, just long enough. Dad, calm down. Garrett is already handling it. You don't need to worry about this. She said it the way a person says something they have rehearsed. Not unkindly, not harshly, with a smoothness that had nothing natural in it. The kind of smoothness you only arrive at by going over the words enough times that they stop being words and become a route you've memorized so thoroughly you can walk it without light. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of the business I had spent 40 years building and listened to my daughter tell me not to worry, and felt something shift inside my chest that had nothing to do with the bank letter sitting face down on my side table at home. This was not Garrett handling a problem. This was Garrett having prepared for one, and Pamela, whatever she knew or didn't know about the full shape of what was happening, had just told me in a voice smooth as polished stone that everything was fine. Nothing about this morning was fine. I drove to Friendswood. The trip took just under 40 minutes. I kept both hands on the wheel the whole way, watching the highway unspool ahead of me under a sky that had gone the color of old pewter. I hadn't called ahead. If I had, the right words would have been selected, the right expressions settled into place before I arrived. I needed to see them as they were, not as they had prepared to be. I pulled up to the house at 2:30, a well-kept colonial on a quiet street. Trimmed hedges, pressure-washed driveway, a wreath on the front door that Pamela had probably put up 2 weeks before anyone else on the block had thought to. I had helped them move in 7 years ago, carrying boxes through that same front door, while Nadine handed out sandwiches from a cooler she'd packed that morning. That felt like a different life now. Garrett answered the door. He was dressed casually, dark slacks, a collared shirt with the top button undone, and when he saw me, he smiled easy and practiced just wide enough to seem genuine without giving anything away. "Hi, Eugene," he said. "Come on in. Let me handle this. I'm here to protect the family." I stepped inside. Those words settled over me like something cold. I'm here to protect the family. He said it the way a man recites a prayer before eating automatic without thought. I had heard him reach for that phrase before at holiday tables and family talks, that somehow always seemed to end with Garrett steering things his direction. I had always read it as devotion. Standing there in that entryway, I wasn't sure anymore what it actually was. Pamela was in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch, with her hands folded in her lap, a careful, contained stillness I recognized from hospital waiting rooms. Years back, when she used to sit exactly that way, and any movement felt like it might tip something over. She glanced up when I walked in, and for just a second, something moved across her face that I couldn't put a name to. I settled into the chair across from her. "Hi, Pamela," I said. "I need to understand what's going on here." Garrett positioned himself near the kitchen doorway, close enough to be part of the room, far enough to suggest he was leaving us space. "Dad," Pamela began. "Eugene," Garrett's voice was warm and even. "Everything is being taken care of. Nobody needs to be upset about anything." I looked at Pamela. She didn't look back at me. She was staring at her hands, and I watched her draw a slow breath through her nose, the kind a person pulls in when they're working to hold something down. I had seen that same breath from Nadine in the weeks before she finally told me how frightened she had been. I had understood too late what it meant. Then, I want to say this, and I can't. I asked Garrett if I could speak with my daughter privately. He smiled and told me there was no need for that. Whatever I had to say, I could say to both of them. Pamela still didn't raise her eyes. I asked 2 more questions. Both times Garrett answered before she could even part her lips. Not forcefully, never forcefully, just filling every silence so completely that nothing else could fit inside it. By the time the conversation wound down, I realized I had exchanged no more than 3 sentences directly with my own daughter. I stood, shook Garrett's hand, told them I'd be in touch. Pamela walked me to the door. At the threshold, she lifted her eyes to mine. What I saw there was not anger, not guilt, something quieter and more absolute than either, and it stopped me cold. I had spent 40 years learning to read the people I loved. I knew what fear looked like on a face that was trying hard not to show it. My daughter was afraid, not of me, of the man standing 15 feet behind her in his own living room. And she wore that fear the way someone does who has been carrying it a long time, so long it had become part of her skin. I drove home without turning on the radio. It was just past 7 o'clock when I opened the refrigerator. Pamela left a carton of pre-ground coffee on the second shelf every week. A quiet habit she'd kept since Nadine passed her way of making sure I wasn't letting things go. Every Sunday, a fresh carton. It had never occurred to me to question it. I poured a cup and sat down at the kitchen table. The first sip was unremarkable. The second made me stop. It was subtle, not bitter, not off in any way I could have put clearly into words. A faint something at the back of the taste. A quality that didn't belong to the brand I'd been drinking for 15 years. I sat with it, the mug warm in both hands, turning it over in my mind, trying to decide if I was inventing something. I wasn't. I couldn't name what I was tasting, but something in me, the same instinct that had made me stay home when Claire called, the same one that had kept me clear-eyed through 40 years of running a business that had no patience for carelessness, said stop. I carried the mug to the sink and poured it out. Then I stood there a moment, looking at the drain. I didn't throw the carton away. I sealed it in a Ziploc bag and pushed it to the back of the counter away from everything else. I couldn't have fully explained why. I only knew I might need it later. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers in the dark, and the thoughts came the way they always do when there's nothing left to crowd them out, slow at first, then faster, building into a shape I wasn't ready to look at squarely. Pamela's eyes. Garrett at the door. "I'm here to protect the family," answering every question before she could form the words. The way she'd been sitting wound tight, watching the floor. The coffee, that faint, wrong note at the back of my tongue. Claire's voice at 4:30 in the morning. Dad, don't go to work today. Just trust me. I picked up my phone. Claire's name sat right there at the top of my recent calls, the way she'd been first in most things I'd needed lately, without either of us ever planning it that way. I wanted to call her. I wanted to tell her about Pamela's eyes and the taste in that coffee and the particular quality of Garrett's smile when he said, "Let me handle this." But I didn't know where to start, and I didn't want to frighten her with half-formed fears and nothing solid to anchor them to. I set the phone back down. Outside the window, the sky over Pearland was completely dark, flat, unbroken black, pressing against the glass. No stars. No movement. Just silence, total and absolute. I kept coming back to the same thing. Not the mortgage documents, not the police call. My daughter's face, the way she had looked at me in that one unguarded second before the door closed. She was still inside that house, and whatever she was afraid of, she was still inside it with her. The knock came just after 6 o'clock in the morning. Not a hard knock. 3 quiet taps, evenly spaced, the kind that said, "I don't want to wake the neighbors," rather than, "I need you to open this door right now." I was already at the kitchen table with a glass of water, having given up on sleep somewhere around 4 o'clock. I crossed the hallway, unlocked the front door, and found Claire standing on the porch. Her jacket still cold from the outside air, her hair pulled back a canvas tote bag over one shoulder. She looked worn through. She also looked like she had already worked out what came next. I drove straight through," she said before I could ask. "Left San Antonio right after I hung up. Got here around 7:30 yesterday morning." I stared at her. "Yesterday morning, where have you been?" I used Mom's spare key. She held it up briefly, the old brass one Nadine had kept on a hook by the laundry room, the one I hadn't moved since 2020. "I let myself in while you were outside getting the paper. I didn't want to explain anything until I had something real to show you." She set the tote bag on the kitchen table and sat down. "Claire." "Dad." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I need you to listen to me for a few minutes before you say anything." I sat down across from her and listened. She had noticed the changes over the past 4 months, she said. Not in person, we hadn't seen each other as often as either of us would have liked, but over the phone. Small things at first. I would lose the thread of a sentence mid-thought. I would forget something she had told me 2 days before. Something ordinary, a detail about her schedule, or a name I should have held on to. There were afternoons when I sounded tired, in a way that had nothing to do with the hour, a heaviness that moved in and out without any reason she could see. "You've always been sharp," she said. "I mean it. You can walk me through every phase of a carburetor rebuild from memory without missing a step. So when you started forgetting things, easy things, I paid attention." She had asked Pamela about it once, she told me. Called her maybe 2 months ago, wanting to know if I'd been eating well, if I'd had a recent physical. Pamela's response had been careful in a way that felt rehearsed. She said I was fine, that I was simply getting older, that Claire shouldn't worry. But the way she said it made Claire worry more, not less. Then, the night before last Sunday, October 13th, Claire had stopped by Pamela's house in Friendswood on her way through. She hadn't called ahead. Garrett's car wasn't in the driveway. Pamela had let her in, and while Pamela was in the kitchen, Claire had walked past the open door of the home office and seen a document on the screen. She hadn't had time to read it fully, but she had seen enough. She drove the rest of the way to Pearland that night, parked down the block, and sat in her car until she knew what she was going to do. At 4:30 in the morning, she called me. I remembered the fear in her voice. I had taken it for worry. Now I understood it was something more precise than worry. "But after I called you," she said, I used Mom's key and let myself in. You went out for the paper. I pulled a sample from the carton in the refrigerator and sealed it. She reached into the tote bag and placed a folded document on the table between us. Preliminary results came back this morning. There's a sedative compound in the sample. Low concentration consistent with regular repeated exposure. I looked at the paper but left it where it was. I need you to see a doctor today, Claire said. Not your regular physician, someone independent, someone with no connection to Pamela, to Garrett, to anyone in that circle. She drew a business card from the front pocket of the tote bag and laid it on top of the document. His name is Dr. Leonard Ashford. He runs a private practice and has experience with situations like this, cases where someone may have been affected by undisclosed substances over a stretch of time. He's agreed to see you this morning. I picked up the card. I sat with it in silence for a long moment. Then I stood put on my coat and told her I was ready. Dr. Leonard Ashford's office was in a low-profile medical building on the western edge of Houston, the kind of place that seemed deliberately understated. No large signage, no crowded waiting room, just a clean reception area and a man in his late 50s who came out to greet us himself rather than sending a nurse. He was compact and direct reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, carrying the measured calm of someone who had faced difficult situations across a desk for a long time and learned not to be shaken by them. He reviewed Claire's preliminary results first. Then he drew a full blood panel from me, 12 vials processed through an independent lab. He kept specifically for cases where confidentiality was required. While we waited, he asked me to walk him through the past 4 months. My energy, my concentration, any moments of confusion or memory trouble I had noticed. I told him about the mornings I had stood in the workshop unable to recall which service jobs I had scheduled in which order. I told him about the afternoon I had driven past my own street twice before the turn registered. I told him about the fatigue that would hit me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, like a shutter dropping, leaving me barely able to hold myself upright at my desk. He listened without interrupting. He wrote things down. When the results came back, he sat across from me and laid out his findings in plain language. The compound in my system was a benzodiazepine class sedative low dose, consistent with what Claire's preliminary test had found in the coffee sample. At that level, the effects would build gradually across weeks. Trouble concentrating, short-term memory disruption fatigue that deepened through the afternoons, occasional disorientation. To anyone without medical training, and even to some who had it, the picture would be nearly indistinguishable from the early signs of cognitive decline in an older adult. You're not experiencing neurological deterioration, he said. What you're experiencing is the predictable physiological response to prolonged low-level sedation. Your underlying cognitive function, based on everything I'm seeing today, is intact. He said he would prepare a formal medical report, documenting his findings ready within 48 hours. He also said quietly, but without any hesitation, that this was a matter for both an attorney and law enforcement. Claire drove us home. I rode in the passenger seat, watching the flat Houston sprawl move past strip malls, overpasses the long, straight geometry of a city that had never had much use for curves, and I counted backward. 4 months. Pamela had been dropping off the coffee every Sunday for as long as I could remember. Since Nadine passed, since the house went quiet, since the week stopped having the shape it used to have. Every Sunday afternoon, she would stop by, sometimes stay an hour, sometimes just long enough to leave the carton in the refrigerator and satisfy herself that I had food in the house. Every Monday morning, the coffee was there waiting. Every Monday, I had thanked her for looking after me. I had thanked her. Dr. Ashford's report sat in a folder on my lap, and I held it without opening it again. I thought about all those Sunday afternoons, all those small acts of care I had accepted without question, and I turned the pieces over trying to find some other arrangement that made a different picture. I couldn't find one. Claire didn't start the engine right away. We sat in the parking lot outside Dr. Ashford's building, the two of us, and neither of us spoke for a while. Through the windshield, I could see the Houston skyline sitting under low gray cloud, cover the kind of sky that won't commit to rain, but won't let the light through either. A gust moved across the lot and sent a scatter of dried leaves skittering over the asphalt in front of us, and I watched them go without any particular thought. I couldn't locate what I was feeling. That was the strange part. I had expected anger or grief or that particular cold clarity that sometimes arrives when something you suspected turns out to be true. What I found instead was a hollowness, a stillness at the center of things that didn't resemble any emotion I had a name for. Like the moment just after a sound stops, when the air still holds the shape of it, but the sound itself is already gone. Claire reached over and took my hand. She didn't say a word. She just held it, fingers folded over mine, the way Nadine used to hold my hand in hospital waiting rooms, not quite to comfort, but to anchor, to say I am here, and I am not going anywhere. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I had needed someone to do exactly that. We sat that way for a few minutes. Then Claire reached into the canvas tote bag with her free hand and set something on the center console between us. It was an envelope, old, the paper gone soft at the edges, and shifted to that particular ivory tone that white paper takes on after years in a drawer, the color of something preserved rather than forgotten. The handwriting on the front was Nadine's. I would have known it anywhere. The slight leftward lean, the careful spacing, the way she always formed the letter L with a small upward hook at the base. For Claire, open when the time is right. I looked at it for a long moment without reaching for it. Mom gave it to me about 6 months before she passed, Claire said quietly. She made me promise not to open it until I felt like the moment was asking for it. She paused. I didn't know what that meant at the time. I think I do now. I picked up the envelope. The flap had been sealed with the kind of care Nadine brought to everything she considered important, pressed down firmly, no gaps. I worked it open slowly, not wanting to tear anything. Inside was a single folded page written front and back in that same familiar hand, the ink faintly faded, but every letter still legible. I unfolded it and began to read. She started with ordinary things, the way she had loved mornings in the Perland house. The particular quality of light through the kitchen window at 7 a.m. in October. The way I looked when I came in from the garage with grease on my forearms and never noticed, until she pointed it out, the way Pamela used to fall asleep in the car on long drives. Her head tipped against the window, her breathing going slow, and even before we'd made it out of the neighborhood, the way Claire, even as a small child, used to watch people really watch them with that steady, unhurried attention that had always seemed too old for her age. She wrote about what we had built together and what she was proud of and what she was grateful for. And then, about 2/3 of the way down the second page, the handwriting slowed. I could see it in the spacing, the letters becoming more deliberate, each one set down with extra care. Eugene, if you're reading this, then something I was afraid of has already begun. I don't know what form it will take. I only know that I saw things in those last years that I didn't speak about enough, and I'm sorry for that. I should have said more while I still had the chance. Trust Claire. She sees what the rest of us choose not to see, and she has always loved you without condition. And please, whatever happens, don't give up on Pamela. What I'm about to share changed the way I understood everything that had been happening to me, not over weeks, but over months, right inside my own home. Before we get there, let me ask you something. If you slowly began to sense that someone close to you was not who they claimed to be, would you trust that feeling and act on it? Or would you wait until you had something you could prove? She is still our daughter. She is still the little girl who used to curl up asleep in the back seat of that old truck, and no matter what she has done or let happen, some piece of her will always be that child. She will need her father most at the moment she feels most lost. Don't let her go through that without you. I love you. I have loved you since long before you ever noticed I was watching. Take care of yourself, Eugene. Look after each other. Nadine. I went through it a second time and then a third. The parking lot existed around me, the muffled noise of the highway somewhere beyond the gray sky, bearing down flat and heavy. Claire was beside me, utterly still, eyes forward, granting me whatever thin version of privacy 4-car doors can provide. What moved through me didn't arrive sharply. It built the way a weather system builds a slow, almost imperceptible shift in pressure, the air changing quality, before you can name what's different. And then, without any intention on my part, my vision went soft, and the page in my hands lost its edges. No sound came out of me. I sat with it, let it pass through at its own pace, the way a quiet rain works, no fanfare, no announcement, just a gradual soaking into everything. Claire's grip on my hand tightened. When it had run its course, I folded the letter back along the same lines Nadine had pressed into it. I worked deliberately, no bent corners, every fold, exact the way you handle something you know you'll return to. I slid it into the left breast pocket of my jacket and held my palm against it for a beat. The hollowness I'd been carrying hadn't lifted, but its character had shifted. It felt less like a void now, and more like cleared ground, like a room where someone had pushed the windows open. I looked at the sky a moment longer. Then I turned toward Claire. "All right," I said, the words scraped out rougher than I meant them to. "What's our next move?" She met my eyes. Hers were calm and ready, and I could see in them that she hadn't just figured this out on the drive over. She'd had it mapped before she ever knocked that morning, before she pointed her car north through the dark from San Antonio, before she parked down the street and sat waiting for 4:30 to arrive. The answer existed. She'd simply been holding it until I was in a place to receive it. In the parking lot, Claire had given me 2 words in reply. Briscoe first. Then the engine turned over, and I didn't need the rest spelled out. If Garrett had constructed a medical case against me, and after the previous morning, neither of us had any doubt that he had then a physician with standing had to be behind it. There was only one doctor who had carried 20 years of my medical history and could have made that case carry weight. We pulled into Dr. Briscoe's lot just shy of 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning. The waiting room looked exactly as it always had. The same watercolor prints, the same thin thread of antiseptic underneath the cedar from the diffuser on the receptionist's desk, the same instrumental music seeping out of walls I'd never quite pinpointed. I had occupied that room more times than I could tally, with Nadine once upon a time, and then alone after she was gone, keeping appointments that had started to feel like going through motions I no longer believed in. Knowing what was coming made the familiar surroundings worse, not better. Briscoe met us himself at the door to the back, rather than sending his nurse. Tall, mid-60s, white-haired, a man whose professional composure had always read to me as trustworthy, the composure of someone trained to stay level in rooms where everyone else was unraveling. But the handshake he offered that morning was a half-beat too brief, and his eyes landed somewhere behind my left shoulder rather than on my face. I knew before he opened his mouth. 40 years of reading people across tables had given me that much. His office, his desk, 3 pages of formal letterhead, his signature anchoring each one which he placed in front of me without quite directing his gaze at me. He said he needed to go over some concerns regarding my cognitive health, that had surfaced in recent evaluations. I left the document where it was. Claire drew Dr. Ashford's report from her bag and set it on the desk. Her movements unhurried, each one placed with care. 8 weeks ago, she said, you ran a routine physical and signed off on my father's health as normal across every measured category. That included cognitive function. 2 fingers tapped once on Ashford's report. This assessment was completed yesterday independently. It finds his cognitive function intact and concludes that any episodes of confusion or memory trouble are attributable to sustained low-level sedation, not neurological decline, a beat of quiet. So what I want to understand, Dr. Briscoe, is what exactly shifted in 8 weeks. The silence stretched until I could hear the instrumental music threading through the walls again. Briscoe's hands rested on the desk surface. I watched his fingertips press down just slightly, the unconscious gesture of a man searching for something that won't move. He said nothing. I know about the $50,000, Claire said. The response from Briscoe was almost nothing, a small catch in his breathing barely there, but it was sufficient. His shoulders came down a precise half-inch. His face reorganized itself around an expression I had no trouble naming because I had worn it myself in the months after certain choices I'd made in business and couldn't take back. The expression of a man whose hidden ledger has finally been opened in front of witnesses. He pulled open the center desk drawer and produced a cheap, prepaid phone, the variety that comes sealed in plastic at the drugstore counter, and set it on the desk between us. He came to see me in the first week of October. Briscoe said, his voice measured and labored like words being drawn up from depth. He brought documentation of something from 2015, a prescription error it turned out to be minor, no lasting harm done. I'd disclosed it and gone through all the proper channels at the time, but the picture he painted of what he could do with it. He paused. He put $50,000 on the table and made clear that if I refused, that documentation would find its way to the medical board and to 2 journalists he named by name, journalists who specifically cover healthcare liability. He already had their names prepared. He glanced down at the phone. I signed the report out of fear, he said. I'm not asking you to excuse that. I'm telling you so you have the full picture of what took place. He nudged the phone across the desk toward Claire. I recorded him during that visit. I can't tell you exactly why I wasn't clear-headed enough to have a strategy. I think something in me knew even then that the recording would matter at some point. Claire picked up the phone, located the file, and hit play. Garrett's voice filled the small speaker, unhurried, relaxed. The same voice that had sat across from me at holiday dinners and family tables for years. The voice I had heard 2 days ago at his own front door, telling me calmly that he was only there to protect the family. No anger in it on the recording. No edge. He walked through what he knew, what he intended to do with it, what he was offering in return, and he delivered each piece the way someone recites a list they've rehearsed, until it's smooth, one item following the next, with no wasted motion. He understood leverage the way an engineer accounts for stress and load, no sentiment involved, just a careful calculation of what would bear weight and what wouldn't. I think you'll find this arrangement benefits everyone, he said near the end. Dr. Hartwell is getting older. His family is simply trying to ensure he's properly looked after. You'd be doing him a kindness, really. I sat there and listened to my son-in-law's voice explain the kindness he was performing on my behalf. Something settled very cold and very still inside me, different from the hollow quiet in that parking lot. Less like absence, more like focus, the way the air changes when the temperature finally breaks. Claire ended the recording. She held Briscoe's gaze for a moment. Then, we're going to need a formal written statement from you. And the original recording will need to go to an attorney. She delivered it without a trace of anger, in the same measured tone she might use walking a colleague through a project schedule. Briscoe gave a small nod. He looked reduced, as though the chair he was sitting in had grown while we watched, and he had quietly gotten smaller inside it. "I'll do whatever is needed," he said. I should have reached out to someone right away. I know that." I had nothing to offer in response. I wasn't sure what words would have applied. We were crossing the parking lot toward the car when Claire's phone buzzed inside her coat pocket. She stopped mid-stride and looked at the screen. I watched something move across her face, and then go still. She turned the phone so I could see it. A court notification out of Harris County, automated, formal, the language clipped and bureaucratic in the way that legal language always is when it is telling you something that will rearrange your life. Garrett Owen Colton had filed a petition for emergency guardianship over Eugene Hartwell on the morning of Monday, October 14th. The petition cited deteriorating cognitive function and an inability to manage personal and financial affairs without assistance. The hearing was set for Monday, October 21st, 5 business days out. I stood there and read it twice the same way I had read Nadine's letter, not because the meaning hadn't landed the first time, but because a second reading is sometimes what it takes to make a thing fully real. The filing date, Monday the 14th. The same morning, Claire had rung me before daylight and said, "Don't go in." The same morning, Garrett had apparently been somewhere inside a courthouse submitting paperwork that described me as a man who could no longer be trusted to run his own life. He had been running 2 operations at once, front door and back door, and he had timed them to close on the same day. Claire tucked the phone away. 5 days, she said. I looked at her. 5 days is what we have. Clifton Hale's office was on the 11th floor of a building in the Greenway Plaza area, bookshelves, lined with actual books, a desk cleared, to the degree that suggested someone who didn't let things pile up. He was in his early 50s with the unhurried manner of a man who had learned that urgency is most effective when it stays off your face. Claire had found him through a colleague, no overlap with Garrett, with Pamela, or with any professional network that had already been touched. We sat across from him and walked through it all in sequence. The mortgage documents, the coffee, Ashford's report. Briscoe's recording the court notification from that morning. Hale listened without a word, filling a legal pad in small, precise handwriting. When we finished, he set the pen down and held the silence a moment. Then he walked us through what we were up against. Under Texas law, an emergency guardianship petition could be granted by a probate court without the subject's prior notification, provided the petitioner could demonstrate an immediate risk to that person's health, safety, or financial welfare. The evidentiary bar was lower than in a standard proceeding. Once granted, the appointed guardian would hold legal authority over financial decisions, medical decisions, and personal affairs, and any legal action Eugene attempted to bring would first require the guardian's consent. Which means, Hale said, if this goes through on Monday, anything you try to do after that point needs Garrett Colton's sign-off. He went through what we had laid in front of him. Ashford's report was solid, independent, credentialed, specific. The Briscoe recording was significant, but would run into authentication challenges. Briscoe's written recantation had value, though Garrett's attorneys would argue he'd been pressured into it. What you have demonstrates that Eugene's cognitive function is intact, and that medical evidence was falsified. What it doesn't show is the underlying purpose, what Garrett Colton stands to gain from all of this. For that, I need full access to the business accounts, property records, and estate documents from the time of Nadine Hartwell's passing. He looked at me directly. And I need to know who else has had their hands on those documents in the past 12 months. I told him about Hal Kenway. Hale wrote the name down and said he would need to talk to him in person. 5 business days is workable, Hale said. Tight, but workable. Nothing reaches Garrett's attorneys, the press, or anyone outside this room until I give the word. If he learns we're building a counter-filing, he'll move faster. I told him he had my word. I made the calls from the passenger seat while Claire drove. 6 partners I had worked alongside for more than a decade, men whose names sat in my phone next to notes about their children and their anniversaries, because Nadine had always held that remembering was a way of showing respect. I kept the message the same for each of them. There was a legal challenge to my standing as owner of Hartwell & Sons. I was handling it through the proper channels and wanted them to hear it from me first. 4 stood with me without hesitation. 1 said he needed to consult his own attorney before he could say anything further. 1 said he was sorry, and the particular way he said it told me Garrett had already been in touch with him. I filed that away and kept going. It was past 9 o'clock when I turned into the lot behind Hartwell & Sons. I hadn't set out to come here. I had started back toward Pearland and found somewhere around the interchange that my hands had made a different decision. I sat in the car a moment and looked at the rear of the building. The old brick, the bay doors rolled down the security light above the back entrance, doing its quiet, steady work. Then I went inside. The workshop held the kind of quiet that large spaces hold at night. Not silence exactly, but a settled stillness full of low, ambient sound. The smell of it was familiar grease and metal and the pine cleaner the crew ran through on Fridays. I switched on only the light in the small back office. The photographs were in their usual places. The shot from opening day 1983. Nadine laughing at something off to the left of the frame, me in a shirt I had pressed myself because the occasion called for it. The one from the year we brought on Ruben Oviedo, our first full-time hire, now senior floor manager. The photograph of Hal Kenway the day he joined us, shaking my hand in front of the entrance, both of us squinting into the afternoon light. I pulled out the chair and sat down at the desk. In the top drawer I found a sheet of blank paper. I took the pen from the ceramic mug Nadine had painted one Christmas, the one that said Hartwell's in her handwriting, and I started to write. I wrote to Pamela. No outline, no plan, I let it come as it came. Saturday mornings, when she was small, the way she used to perch on the workbench and pass me tools and ask questions that made me slow down and think before I answered. The afternoon I taught her to drive in the empty lot behind the church off Mason Road. How she had laughed every time she stalled the engine 3 times running, and how that laugh had been her mother's laugh exactly. The grief and fury and bewilderment that had been lodged in my chest since Sunday, wordless until now. When I finished, I read it back once. Then I folded it, set it in the old glass ashtray on the corner of the desk, and touched the lighter to the bottom edge. The paper took slowly. I watched the flame travel across the words in the order I had written them, the edges curling inward as it went. It was done in under a minute. I waited for the ash to cool, collected what was left, and set it in the wastebasket. I stayed with the quiet a little longer. Then I switched off the light and moved back through the dark workshop and out into the night. I stood in the lot and looked up at the sign over the entrance, Hartwell & Sons Auto Repair, in the lettering I had chosen 40 years ago. The red and white still clean under the amber glow of the corner streetlight. I had driven past that sign so many times, it had stopped registering the way a beloved face stops registering when you've looked at it every morning for decades. It was registering now. Garrett had moved on 2 tracks at once, medical and legal, and he had timed them to converge before I could draw breath to respond. He had been deliberate patient. He had planned everything carefully. But he hadn't planned for Claire. He hadn't planned for Briscoe holding onto a recording. He hadn't planned for Hal Kenway walking a set of numbers that didn't add up all the way to my desk. And he hadn't planned for me standing outside my own building on a Wednesday night at 10 clear-eyed, and 4 months overdue for this moment. The days ahead would be harder. Each of the 4 remaining would bring something I hadn't seen coming. But standing under that streetlight on the corner, I made my decision the way I had always made the ones that mattered, quietly, without ceremony, in the stillness that comes just before the work starts. I walked back to the car. The first call came at 7 o'clock in the morning. I was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, real coffee, from a bag I'd picked up myself the evening before, when the phone started. It was Bud Garfield, who ran a fleet maintenance contract out of Deer Park and had been one of my steadiest accounts for 11 years. His voice carried the particular quality of a man who wants to extend good faith, but isn't sure anymore whether the situation warrants it. Somebody had talked to him. He needed me to explain something. He played it through the phone speaker. 32 seconds of audio, a voice that resembled mine in cadence, carrying the same slight flatness I've always had on certain vowels, the same general rhythm of pauses landing in roughly the right places. The voice said it had always been his intention to pass Hartwell and Sons to family, that Garrett Colton was the right man for it, that the transfer at $1 was a gift freely given and long considered. I went through it twice without speaking. "That's not me," I said. Bud said he didn't know what to make of it. I asked him to hold off on any decisions and told him I'd be back to him within the hour. Then I hung up and called Claire from the hallway. She was downstairs in 4 minutes, still pulling her hair back. I handed her the phone with the audio file Bud had forwarded. She listened once. Then she put it on speaker and went through it again with her eyes closed. Her head angled slightly, the way she does when something has her full attention. Then a third time. On the 4th pass, she stopped it at the 17-second mark. "What is the full legal name of the business?" she said. "Exactly." I looked at her. "Hartwell and Sons Auto Repair. Has been since 1983. She turned the phone screen toward me and pressed play from the top. At the 11-second mark, the voice, my voice or whatever, had been built to sound like it referred to the business as Hartwell Machine Works. I caught it clearly the second time through now that I knew where to listen. 3 words that had never appeared on a tax document, a business license, a contract, or a sign in 40 years of operation. 3 words assembled from something I actually said, my machine shop, an offhand phrase I used in passing conversation, in radio interviews, in the kind of loose description that comes out when a journalist asks you to characterize your business, and you reach for the nearest shorthand. Whatever had constructed this recording had been trained on that shorthand. And whoever had sent it out had been too sure of the output to verify the details. "He didn't listen all the way through," Claire said. No anger in it. She said it the way you'd note that it was going to rain. Or he heard it and didn't catch it because he doesn't actually know the name. I thought about that. In 7 years of family dinners and holidays and Sunday afternoons, I couldn't recall Garrett ever using the name of the business. He called it the shop or your business or the operation, the kind of shorthand that serves well enough until precision suddenly matters. It had mattered this time. Claire found the audio analyst through Clifton Hale's office, a woman named Iris Beauchamp, who ran an independent forensic audio practice in the Westchase district and had testified in 3 federal cases in the past 2 years. We were in her office by 10:30. She asked for the original file and the forwarding metadata from Bud's email. She worked in near silence for 40 minutes, while Claire and I sat across from her workstation and kept mostly quiet. Then she turned her monitor toward us and walked us through what she had found. The file had artifacts consistent with neural audio synthesis, microscopic irregularities in the breath patterns between phrases, an unnatural flatness in the ambient room tone that matched no real recording environment, and a specific kind of transition smoothing at the 17-second mark, precisely where two source samples had been joined. She couldn't name the specific tool responsible. Several were capable of output at this quality level, but she could state with professional certainty that the recording was not a capture of a live human voice. Her written report would be ready by end of day. I called Hale from the parking lot and told him what we had. He said to get the report to him the moment it was available, and that it shifted the shape of the counter filing considerably. A fabricated audio document distributed to business associates with the aim of undermining the subject's professional standing that was not the behavior of someone acting to protect a vulnerable family member. That was the behavior of someone working to eliminate opposition. It helps us establish intent, Hale said. Keep going. I spent the balance of the afternoon on the phone. The same 6 names from the previous day plus 4 more who had reached out after the recording found them. I gave each of them the same message: the audio was synthetic, forensically confirmed, and documentation would be in their hands by Friday morning. I told them I understood if they needed more time. I told them the shop had been operating on my name and my word for 40 years, and I wasn't asking them to take either on faith, only to wait 24 hours for the paper. Most of them waited. The one who had already sounded like Garrett had gotten to him was Norm Blevins. He had 3 trucks on a rotating service schedule at my shop, and he called back at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to say he was suspending the contract pending resolution of the legal matter. He was civil about it. I was civil back. I noted it and kept moving the same as I had noted the one the day before. The math was still running in our favor. For now. By 11 o'clock that night, Claire and I were at the kitchen table with the full evidence file laid out between us, physical copies of everything arranged in the sequence Hale had specified. Ashford's report, Briscoe's recantation, and the original recording, the forensic audio analysis, the mortgage documentation Hal had flagged, the court petition, and the timeline Hale had reconstructed, a sequence of Garrett's moves reaching back further than any of us had first understood. Claire was working through the property records for the 3rd time, penciling notes in the margin of a legal pad, when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Then she looked at me. The number was unfamiliar. 10 digits, area code 225. She held it up so I could see. I didn't recognize it. I didn't know anyone in 225. Then she answered. She put it on speaker before she said a word. The voice that came through was a woman's, measured, deliberate, with the particular evenness of someone who has rehearsed what she intends to say so many times that the emotion has been worn out of it, leaving only the shape of the words behind. My name is Connie Delray. I'm calling from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I believe the man your family knows as Garrett Colton is the same man who destroyed my family 15 years ago. Neither Claire nor I moved. Connie spoke without leaving gaps for questions, as if she had learned from experience that interruptions could break the thread, and she needed to get through it whole. Her father was Walter Delray, born 1941, the owner of a small hardware supply business in Baton Rouge that he had built over 30 years. In the spring of 2008, her older sister had married a man named Derek Falk, charming, attentive, the kind of man who made a deliberate point of winning over the father. He knew exactly what he was doing from the start, Connie said. He wasn't in love with my sister. He was in love with my father's business. The pattern she described was patient and methodical. Paperwork first. Derek had a gift for finance, everyone said so, and Walter had been glad to have someone younger take on the complexity of it. Then the gradual narrowing of Walter's circle, a misunderstanding here, a missed occasion there, small frictions accumulating, until the people who might have noticed something were no longer in regular contact. By mid-2009, Derek had consolidated signing authority over the primary business accounts. In early 2010, he moved the assets and disappeared. Walter Delray was 70 years old when he lost everything. The business was gone. The savings account he had kept separate, the one he had told no one about, the one Connie herself had not known existed, had been located and emptied in the final weeks before Derek left. Walter hadn't understood, Connie said, how any of it had happened. He had placed his trust in someone, and that trust had been the very instrument used against him. He passed away 8 months later. His doctor said it was his heart. "I've always thought it was simpler than that," Connie said. "I think he just couldn't find a reason." The line went quiet for a moment. Claire cast a quick look my way. My eyes hadn't left the phone sitting on the table between us. "In 2011, Connie went on, I brought in a private investigator. The trail dried up in Texas. Derek Falk, the legal name, the social security number, every address on record, all of it hit a wall at the Louisiana state line in 2010. Who he'd been before Derek Falk and what name he'd been living under, since I couldn't get to either." She paused. "I kept the investigator on the payroll regardless. I couldn't fully explain it to myself. I suppose I had to hold on to the idea that something would eventually break loose. Something had broken loose 3 days ago. Garrett Colton's emergency guardianship petition had turned up in the public docket of the Harris County Court, and Connie's investigator had caught it during a routine sweep for financial elder abuse filings in Texas, a sweep Connie had kept running for years, built on the conviction that a man who'd done this once wouldn't stop. The investigator had gone through the associated documents, pulled a photograph attached to a professional license Garrett had filed, and ran it against a database of images built up across 13 years of that search. Nobody ran an algorithm. The investigator set the two photographs side by side, Derek Falk in 2009, Garrett Colton in 2023, and picked up the phone to call Connie within the hour. "He took a new name legally in 2011, Connie said. "I verified it this afternoon through court records in Harris County. Garrett Owen Colton. Before any of that, he was Derek Owen Falk. The name change itself sits in public record, a legal document nobody had gone looking for, because nobody had understood there was a reason to look." "How did you track down Claire's number?" I asked. It was the first question I'd managed since she'd begun. "Texas Nursing License Registry," Connie said. "It's public. Your daughter's name was listed in the guardianship petition filings as next of kin. I pulled her license number, ran it against the registry, and dialed the contact on file." A short pause. "I almost let it go. I didn't know if you'd take any of this seriously. Honestly, I still don't." "We take it seriously," Claire said. "I'm sending a photograph to that registry email right now," Connie said. "Derek Falk. October 2009 at a business event in Baton Rouge. My father is in it. Derek is standing right beside him." Claire's laptop was already open on the table. She brought up the email, spotted the message that had come in while we were still on the call, and clicked the attachment. The image had the graininess you'd expect from a digital camera of that era, shot inside a banquet room under overhead lighting that served nobody well. 8 or 9 people stood in the frame. On the right side, positioned next to an older man who wore the look of someone whose working life had been done with his hands, was a younger face, a face I'd shared dinner tables with for 7 years. His hair was styled differently. He was carrying less weight. His expression was loose and social, the look of a man who was genuinely comfortable in the room. There wasn't a shred of doubt. I stayed with that photograph for a long moment. Then my eyes went back to the phone, to Connie Del Rey, on the far end of the line in Baton Rouge, with 13 years of searching folded into a call at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night. I thought about Walter Del Rey at 70, trying to work out how the trust he'd placed in someone had become the very thing that destroyed him. I thought about those 8 months between the ruin and his heart finally quitting. I brought the phone a little closer. "Connie," I said. Everything you have, the investigator's reports, the name change paperwork, the photograph, whatever else there is. I need you to send it all to a lawyer named Clifton Hale in Houston. He'll be in touch with you first thing tomorrow morning. My voice stayed flat, and even the same way it had across every negotiating table where the number was wrong, and I needed the other side to feel that I knew exactly how wrong it was. There's a hearing Monday. 5 days from now, this is over for both of us. Quiet on the line. Then, in a voice barely above a murmur, Connie said, I've been waiting a long time for somebody to say those words. So have I told her. And I only learned any of this existed 4 days ago. A sound came through the speaker, small, and warned something that might have been a laugh. It all goes out tonight, she said. By 8 o'clock Friday morning, we were back at Hale's office. Connie's package had come through overnight. The investigator's full report, the name change documentation, the 2009 photograph, and 3 more photographs from that same Baton Rouge event, each capturing Derek Falk from a different angle, every one of them beyond dispute. Hale had been at his desk since 6 o'clock and had already started folding the Louisiana material into the counterfiling. He laid out exactly where we were. 4 pieces of evidence pulled together across 5 days. The Ashford report, which established that Eugene's cognitive function was sound. The Briscoe recording, which captured an attempted bribe and the invention of a fraudulent medical evaluation. The forensic audio analysis establishing that the circulated recording had been synthetically produced. And now the Louisiana file, a prior name, a prior victim, a prior pattern mapped across 13 years of documented investigative work and confirmed in public court records. Does this get us there? Claire asked. Hale took a moment before answering the particular pause he used when he was after precision rather than speed. It defeats the petition, he said. What it doesn't hand us is Garrett Colton's intent in his own words, him saying in his own voice what he was after and how he was going about it. Taken piece by piece, everything we have is circumstantial. A skilled attorney on the other side could build an innocent explanation around any one of them. He set his pen on the table. We need something. There's no explaining away. We spent the rest of the morning working through what we had. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I lifted my phone and called Pamela. She picked up on the 3rd ring. During the drive in that morning, and again through the hours around that conference table, I'd been turning over what I might say. The way you worry at a problem when you sense the answer isn't a logical one. By the time I dialed, I'd accepted that whatever I'd rehearsed mattered less than simply saying what was honest. Pamela, I said, I'm not calling to ask you for anything. I'm not calling to lay out what I know or what Monday looks like. There's just one thing I need you to hear. I stopped. Whatever he's holding over you to keep you in place, I don't need to know what it is. You are still my daughter. I am still your father, and I haven't gone anywhere. Silence came back through the line. Not the controlled silence of someone putting a careful answer together something else entirely. The kind of silence with actual mass to it. The kind that tells you something is shifting on the other end, something the person can't yet find language for. Then the call cut off. I rested the phone on the conference table and sat with it for a moment. Claire was watching me from her side of the table. Hale had his eyes on his legal pad. Neither of them offered anything which was exactly right. 10 minutes on Claire's laptop gave a chime. She checked the screen. Then she looked up at me. At email, she said. Anonymous sender, no subject. She angled the laptop around. The message held 4 words. I'm sorry, Dad. Beneath them a link pointing to a cloud storage address. Hale's IT contact was there within the hour to check the link before anyone clicked it, a necessary precaution, he said. The link came back clean. What it led to was a private storage account, its contents arranged in monthly folders reaching back 14 months. Each monthly folder held audio files. Some were video. Hale opened the first one 1st September of last year, time-stamped to a Thursday evening, and we listened. Garrett's voice filled the laptop speaker at close-range clarity. He was talking to Pamela. He was walking her through something, using the measured tone of someone explaining a lesson to a student who hasn't been quick enough to grasp it, patient on the surface with a coldness running under that patience that only appears when the patience itself is an act. He was telling her precisely what the consequences would be if she spoke to her father outside of his presence. He went through each one in order, unhurried, deliberate. Not once did his voice climb. I knew that cadence. I'd heard its twin in the Briscoe recording the same underlying structure of control, the same method of sealing off every exit. After 3 minutes, Claire leaned over and shut the laptop. "How many files are we looking at?" Hale asked his IT contact. "Our preliminary count is 231, the man said. Audio and video combined. 14 months. Hale's eyes moved between the two of us. I need to understand how she pulled this off," he said. Not with skepticism professionally, because authenticating the recordings would depend in part on how they'd been captured. I didn't have that answer yet. It came 2 hours later when Claire was working through the folder structure and turned up a subfolder marked only with a date, the date of Nadine's funeral 3 years ago. Inside was a single photograph, taken in low light, of a small recording device, no bigger than a fingertip, nestled at the center of an antique brooch. The kind a woman of Nadine's generation would pin to the collar of a good jacket. The brooch had been Nadine's. I knew it the moment I saw it. A small oval of dark blue enamel ringed in silver, the sort of piece Nadine had picked up at an estate sale years before Pamela was born, and worn to every occasion that called for something that looked deliberate. Pamela had worn it at the funeral. I'd noticed it that day, and assumed she was paying tribute to her mother. She was. Just not only that. She concealed the device inside the brooch. Claire said, her voice low. She wore it to every meeting, every time Garrett was on a call she happened to be in the room for, every time she stopped. She uploaded in batches, public Wi-Fi. She'd have had maybe an hour at a stretch whenever she was out of the house on her own. I thought about the Sundays Pamela had come to see me, how she had always made it back before dark, what had been there waiting when she walked through the door. We worked through Friday night and kept going into Saturday morning. Hale and his associates sorted through the recordings and pulled the ones with the most evidentiary weight, the ones capturing specific acts rather than broad patterns of behavior, the ones that fixed dates and connected directly to the financial transactions Hal Kenway had flagged in the business accounts, the ones in which Garrett laid out his intentions with enough precision that no one would need to interpret them. There were more of those than any of us had anticipated. By 2 o'clock in the morning, we had identified 11 recordings of primary evidentiary value. By 3 o'clock, each one had been cross-referenced against the timeline Hale had been assembling since Wednesday. I can't say exactly when I stopped contributing anything useful at that table. Somewhere along the way, I had pushed my chair back from the papers and was simply sitting there, tilted slightly, staring up at the ceiling, while the others pressed on. It was the standard commercial drop tile that fills office ceilings everywhere, the kind of surface you fix your eyes on when you aren't really looking at anything at all. And in my ears, quieter now, as if arriving from somewhere far off, I could still hear the texture of Garrett's voice from those recordings, the methodical patience of it, the deliberate sequencing. No trace of hesitation anywhere in it. The voice of someone running a procedure, someone who had run it before. In Baton Rouge with a man named Walter Delray, who had spent 30 years building something and watched it disappear inside of 2. And then I thought about Pamela in the house in Friendswood, in that room off the hallway, where Garrett kept his office standing in the kitchen on Sunday afternoons before she drove out to Pearland to leave a carton of coffee in her father's refrigerator. Wearing her mother's brooch, carrying 14 months of recordings through a grocery store checkout line, connecting to a public network, uploading in batches, waiting for a moment she wasn't certain would ever arrive. Hale's associate said something to Claire across the table. Claire answered. Papers shifted. Beyond the windows of the 11th floor conference room, the sky over Houston was still completely dark. I was up before 5 o'clock. I had slept 3 hours. When I woke, I held still for a moment in the dark, then got up, showered, and stood in front of the open closet longer than the decision required. The suit hung on the far left, still sheathed in the dry cleaner's bag. Charcoal wool, serious, without being formal. Nadine had bought it for my 60th birthday, taken me to the store herself, stood back with her arms crossed while I worked through the jackets, and said that one with the quiet certainty of someone who had made up her mind before we'd ever walked in. I'd worn it to the birthday dinner and twice after that before she got sick. Not once since she passed. I lifted it off the hanger, laid it flat on the bed, and dressed deliberately the way you dress when you want each motion to mean something. When I finished, I slipped my hand into the breast pocket and felt for the folded envelope I had put there the night before, still there. I left the house at 6:15. The courtroom was smaller than the version I had been building in my head across 5 days of anticipation. A room. Wood paneling, fluorescent overhead, light, a raised bench, 2 counsel tables. Registering the gap between expectation and reality brought a small, practical steadiness. Hale guided me to the right-hand table. I sat. Garrett was already at the left, charcoal gray suit, 2 attorneys arranging documents with the ease of people entirely at home in that room. He had the look of a man who had arrived early for a meeting he had no doubt about. He caught my eye across the room and held it for 1 second, then turned back to his attorneys. I'd seen that look before. It was the look of a man communicating that he wasn't concerned. Claire was in the gallery behind me. I didn't turn, but I felt her there. Judge Harriet Fielding took the bench at 9 o'clock, compact silver-haired reading glasses that moved between her face and the bench in a practiced, economical rhythm. She confirmed the case number, asked both sides to confirm readiness, and got affirmation from both tables. Garrett's lead attorney went first. He laid out the petition cleanly, and without excess, Eugene Hartwell, 67, had exhibited documented cognitive decline. Dr. Briscoe, his physician of 20 years, had identified deteriorating memory and impaired judgment. Garrett Colton, husband of Eugene's elder daughter, had witnessed this decline directly and sought emergency guardianship to protect a vulnerable family member. He used the phrase loving concern twice. I kept both hands flat on the table and watched the judge's face. She was writing. Her expression disclosed nothing. Then Hale stood. He presented the Ashford report. First walked Judge Fielding through it, page by page, unhurried, no theater. Eugene's cognitive baseline, the bloodwork panel, the specific compound identified along with its documented effects at sustained low-level exposure. The timeline showing a minimum of 4 months of consistent presence in Eugene's system. The petitioner's own medical evidence, Hale said, describes symptoms that are the predictable result of sustained low-level sedation. Dr. Ashford's assessment establishes that Mr. Hartwell's underlying cognitive function is fully intact. What has been presented as evidence of decline is evidence of something else entirely. He let it land before moving to the next exhibit. I didn't look at Garrett. I kept my eyes on the judge. Dr. Briscoe took the stand voluntarily. He was dressed plainly and crossed to the witness chair with the careful, deliberate gait of a man who had been carrying something alone for too long. Hale took him through it, step by step, Garrett's visit in the first week of October. The $50,000. The threat. The signing of the false report on a Thursday afternoon with the office door shut. Dr. Briscoe answered each question in the same measured voice he'd used in his office on Wednesday. Not performing remorse, not building a defense, simply placing each fact in the order it had happened. When Hale asked to play the audio recording, the judge granted it. Garrett's voice moved through the courtroom, unhurried, methodical, each point arriving after the last, with the patience of someone who had worked it all through beforehand. I felt the room shift while it played. Not a sound from the gallery. Just a change in the quality of the air, the way a room changes when everyone present arrives at the same understanding simultaneously. And then, at the left-hand table, Garrett's right hand closed around the pen in front of him. His face didn't move. His posture held. But his hand closed around that pen and didn't let go. I had spent enough years across tables from people under pressure to read what that meant. Something had reached him, had gotten through the composed exterior, and struck somewhere his expression wasn't quick enough to conceal. 4 seconds. Then his hand eased open. He lifted the pen, marked something down, and was composed again. But I had seen it. Judge Fielding called the recess at 11:43. 15 minutes, she said, closed her notepad, and was gone. The room rearranged itself around me, Hale's hand briefly on my shoulder. Voices rising in the gallery, Garrett's attorneys in a tight conference at the far table. I stayed in my chair and let the room settle around me without moving. After a moment, I brought my right hand up to my chest. The envelope was there, pressed flat against the inner pocket of the suit Nadine had chosen on my 60th birthday, when she had stepped back with her arms folded and said, "That one," before I'd finished forming any opinion of my own. I held my palm flat against the wool, feeling the folded paper through it. "I'm here, Nadine." Just the shape of the words. No sound. I kept my hand there a moment longer. Then I straightened up and waited for the judge to return. Judge Fielding came back at exactly 12:01. The room had shifted during those 15 minutes. A different quality of stillness. A slightly different weight in every chair. Garrett's attorneys were shoulder to shoulder at the left table, their voices too low to carry. Garrett sat very upright, both hands flat on the legal pad in front of him. Whatever he was doing to hold his expression in place, it was costing him something. Hale called Iris Beauchamp to the stand. She walked the court through the forensic analysis, the breath pattern irregularities, the ambient tone inconsistencies, the smoothing artifact at the 17-second mark, where 2 source samples had been stitched together. Then Hale asked about the name. "The file references the business as Hartwell Machine Works," he said. "What does that tell you about the source material?" "The system was trained on informal spoken references rather than official documentation," Beauchamp said. The subject consistently used the phrase "my machine shop" in recorded public appearances. The model constructed a proper noun from that phrase. It's a characteristic error filling gaps with the most statistically probable output from its training data without access to ground truth. And the actual registered name of Mr. Hartwell's business, Hartwell and Sons Auto Repair, registered in Harris County since 1983. The name on the recording has never appeared in any legal document connected to the business. Garrett's attorney cross-examined for 11 minutes. Beauchamp met each challenge with the patience of someone who had testified in federal court and found the experience unremarkable. When it ended, nothing had shifted. Then Garrett stood up. He didn't ask permission. He said something sharp and low to his attorney and pushed up from his chair. His attorney reached out and put a hand on his arm. Garrett shook it off. Judge Fielding looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. "Mr. Colton, you are represented by counsel. Please be seated." The room went very quiet. Garrett held his feet for 2 full seconds, long enough for everyone present to understand that sitting back down was a choice, not a reflex. Then he sat. The composed surface had cracked for a moment, and what showed through was the face of a man who had just grasped that the room he was standing in was not the room he had believed he'd walked into. Hale rose. "Your Honor, we have one additional witness." The door at the back of the courtroom opened. Connie Del Rey came down the center aisle at the deliberate pace of someone who had been waiting a long time for exactly this walk. She did not look at Garrett as she passed the left-hand table. Garrett looked at her. I watched the recognition move across his face, small, internal, gone in under a second. His eyes found her held, then went very still in the particular way eyes go still when the mind behind them is rapidly reorganizing what it knows. Hale presented the Louisiana file through Connie's testimony. Walter Del Rey, the hardware supply business in Baton Rouge, Derek Falk, arriving in 2008, the methodical sequence of paperwork and isolation and asset transfer. Walter's death 8 months after losing everything. 13 years of a private investigator's work. The legal name change filed in Harris County in 2011. Derek Owen Falk becoming Garrett Owen Colton. Connie spoke without once looking at Garrett. Her voice held steady throughout. Hale asked permission to play selections from the audio archive. Judge Fielding granted it. Garrett's voice came through the speaker, Pamela's recordings this time. His own voice in his own home, mapping out each step. A Thursday evening, laying out what would happen to Pamela if she contacted her father without his knowledge. A February morning, discussing the guardianship timeline. A late September conversation describing what Dr. Briscoe needed to sign and why the 2015 incident would provide sufficient leverage. Then, from a recording dated 3 weeks ago, his voice instructing someone on the technical requirements for an audio synthesis. What source material to use? What name to give the business? Hartwell Machine Works, he said on the recording. That's what he calls it. The room did not move. Judge Fielding reached forward and stopped the playback herself. She looked at the papers before her, then looked up. She denied the emergency guardianship petition in 2 sentences without elaboration. Then she looked at the bailiff and said 4 more words. Garrett stood again when the bailiff approached. His attorney spoke rapidly. Garrett said something I couldn't fully make out, but his voice had shed the measured patience it always carried. What replaced it was raw, the voice of someone whose whole architecture had rested on the certainty that this moment would never come. When the bailiff took his arm and turned him toward the door, Garrett looked across the room at me. I don't know what he was looking for. What I saw in his face for the first time in 7 years of knowing him was fear, not the controlled kind he had directed at Pamela and Dr. Briscoe. The real kind. The kind that doesn't know what comes next. The door closed behind him. By the time I became aware of the room again, it had nearly emptied. Hale was beside me, gathering documents. Claire stood a few feet away, close, but giving me space. I was still in my chair, hands on the table, looking at nothing in particular. I had expected something, relief or anger finally cut loose. The satisfaction that arrives when a long effort produces what it was meant to produce. What I felt instead was exhaustion hollowed out, in a way that had nothing to do with the sleep I hadn't gotten. Pamela was sitting at the far end of the front gallery bench, her back to the room, her face turned toward the wall. Her hands rested in her lap. She wasn't moving. She wasn't crying as far as I could see. She was sitting the way a person sits when they've spent everything they had, and there is nothing left to hold up for anyone. Claire touched my arm gently and angled her head toward Pamela. I nodded, but I didn't stand yet. I sat one more moment in the suit Nadine had chosen for my 60th birthday, her letter in my breast pocket, the afternoon light moving across the floor between the two empty council tables. It was over. It didn't feel the way I had imagined it would. I pressed my hand once against the letter. Then I got up and walked toward my daughter. The doors of Harris County Probate Court opened onto pale autumn sunlight and a wind carrying just enough bite to remind you that October in Houston was capable of meaning something. The cameras were already positioned. Connie Del Rey stood at the top of the steps, with the steady composure of someone who had rehearsed nothing and had no need to. She had been carrying this story for 13 years, and she knew every word of it. She said her father's name clearly for the record for the cameras. For anyone watching the evening news in Baton Rouge who had known Walter Del Rey and wondered what had become of the man who'd married his elder daughter and then vanished. She said Derek Falk's name. She said Garrett Colton's name. She said both names belonged to the same person, and she said it without hesitation. The way you say a thing you have been a long time waiting to say aloud. I stood back and watched her from the edge of the steps. Hale was beside me, speaking quietly about what came next. The asset freeze initiated through the court order. The criminal referral going to the Harris County DA's office before end of day. The coordinating contact he had already made with the Baton Rouge authorities, who had kept an open file on Derek Falk going back to 2010. I listened and nodded and took in what he was saying, and I watched Connie Del Rey finish her statement, answer 2 questions from reporters, and then step back from the microphones with the particular stillness of someone setting down something very heavy for the very first time. The freeze covered Garrett's bank accounts, both vehicles, and the property in Friendswood. Everything acquired under the name Garrett Owen Colton, pending investigation. Hale stated it matter-of-factly the way he stated most things. I thought about Walter Del Rey at 70 standing in the wreckage of 30 years of work, trying to make sense of how it had come apart. I thought about the symmetry of it, not with satisfaction exactly, but with the grim recognition that some things do come back around. Pamela emerged from a side door with her attorney 20 minutes later. Hale had already walked me through what the terms were likely to look like, the 14 months of recordings, the full cooperation, the voluntary surrender of everything she had gathered, all of it weighed against the fact that she had been a knowing participant in the early phase of the scheme. A suspended sentence probation, a financial penalty. Not an acquittal, not a clean slate, but a way forward that hadn't been sealed shut. Standing there in the afternoon light, she looked smaller than herself. Not in any physical sense, more the way a person is diminished when the framework they've been propped up inside for years suddenly gives way, and there is nothing left to hold their outline in place. Her attorney murmured something in her ear, then moved off, and Pamela stood alone on the pavement by that side entrance and looked across at me. I walked to her. She tried to begin twice, and twice nothing came. When words finally arrived, they didn't travel far before her voice split open somewhere in the middle of a sentence, and she stopped, covered her mouth with one hand, and just stood there. Her whole frame curved slightly inward, the posture of someone who has been the only thing holding themselves upright for a very long time and has finally reached the point where they cannot continue to do it. I didn't rush her. I let all of it come, the broken-off sentences, the gaps that went nowhere, the things that started but never finished. I stayed where I was and gave it room without offering conclusions or steering her somewhere more comfortable before she was ready. When the silence finally held, I said, "I need time, Pamela. I won't tell you otherwise." My voice stayed even, not distant, just truthful, the same register I had been trying to hold all week. But I want you to hear me on this. I am not done with you. That door is not closed. She nodded. Words weren't available to her. I rested my hand briefly on her shoulder. Nothing more than that. Not an embrace, just the weight of a hand. Just the fact of it. Then I moved back. Claire was a few yards off. She would be the one to stay with Pamela. We had reached that understanding on Sunday without spelling it out the way Claire and I had navigated most things over the past week, through what went unsaid, through the comprehension that had always lived between us without needing to be constructed out loud. I located my car in the parking structure and pulled out into a Monday Houston afternoon by myself. The radio stayed off. The drive back to Pearland ran 40 minutes through traffic, doing what Houston traffic does, bunching again. The freeway stretched out ahead of me in its long, flat way, beneath a sky that had deepened from pale to a settled, muted blue. I kept both hands on the wheel and left the silence alone, not vacant, not quite peaceful. Just what was there, the kind of quiet that arrives after a sustained, heavy sound has finally gone still. I thought of Nadine's letter tucked inside my breast pocket. I thought of the brooch. I thought of Connie Del Rey on the courthouse steps, speaking her father's name, and not once letting her voice waver. I turned into the driveway in Pearland a little shy of 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I sat with the engine off for a minute, the neighborhood settling into Monday afternoon, stillness around me, the particular hush of residential streets. At that hour, a dog in the distance, a leaf blower somewhere past 2 houses, life at its ordinary pitch, carrying on. Then I went in. I pulled the suit jacket off and set it with some care on the back of the bedroom door. The dry cleaner could have it tomorrow. The letter stayed where it was, in the inside pocket. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on and dug out the bag of coffee I had picked up for myself on Thursday, chosen myself from a store I had gotten myself to, which had occupied more of my thinking than buying coffee had any right to, measured it into the filter, brewed a full pot, poured a mug, and sat. The table, the chair, my hands around the cup. The kitchen looked the way it had always looked. The window above the sink catching the same October light at the same afternoon slant it always caught. The chairs unchanged, the table unchanged, the ceramic mug Nadine had painted one Christmas, the one that said Hartwell's in her handwriting, sitting on the counter right where I'd set it down 3 days ago. I held the mug in both hands and took the room in. 6 months ago it had looked this way. A year ago. The morning before any of this found me. But I understood, with the specific kind of knowing that comes when something enormous has passed through your life and deposited you in its aftermath, that none of it was the same. Not the coffee, not the light, not the chair, not the man occupying it. Everything had absorbed what occurred the way things do without showing it on the surface, without advertising the weight they're now carrying. I drank. The coffee was coffee. Nothing more was asked of it. I held that for a while. Past the window, the afternoon was releasing its grip on the day the way October Houston afternoons do, gradual, unannounced, the light warming to gold, then going amber, then beginning at the rim to dissolve into evening. There was still a great deal left to get through. Proceedings, depositions, the painstaking work of dismantling what Garrett had assembled. Pamela had a path ahead of her that would not be gentle. Connie Del Rey was returning to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to whatever shape life took now that 13 years of searching had finally arrived somewhere. Hal Kenway was due at the shop Wednesday, and I'd go through the books with him, and we'd get our hands around what had to be put back together. There was no shortage of work remaining, but right then the kitchen was quiet, and the coffee was warm, and I was sitting in my own house in my own mind, answerable only to myself. That felt like enough for tonight. It was enough. The shop's doors went up at 7 o'clock, same as they always had. I rolled into the lot just past 7:30 a Tuesday in November, 3 weeks out from the hearing. The bays were already open. Before I'd even cut the engine, I could hear the first lift cycling that hydraulic sound I had been absorbing for 40 years, so threaded through the fabric of every working day that it had long since stopped registering as noise and had become something more like a pulse. Ruben Oviedo spotted me first. He was moving across the floor with a clipboard, and when he saw me, he stopped, looked and gave one nod, the kind of nod that holds everything a person wants to say and knows doesn't need saying. A couple of the others glanced up from the hood of a pickup and did the same. No words. None were needed. I returned the nod and crossed through toward the office at the back. Hal Kenway was positioned just outside that door, not filling the frame, standing one step behind it. The way a person stands at the edge of a room they aren't sure they're entitled to enter. Reading glasses up on his forehead. 65 years old. 22 years keeping the books in this shop. His face said what neither of us had yet managed to say to the other directly. I took him in for a moment, then I pushed the door back wider. "Come in, Hal. We've got work ahead of us." He came through, took his seat, started to put something into words. I could watch him building toward it, marshaling whatever he'd been sitting with for 3 weeks. I moved my head once, not harshly. "Books first," I told him. "Talk while we go." He opened the folder. Some things don't want speeches. There are times when forgiveness is nothing fancier than a door swung open and both parties understanding that stepping through it is the whole of it. Hal had seen what was in those numbers and carried them to my desk when it mattered most. What he did with the rest of it was his own business. By 200, we had a clear enough picture, not good but workable. Not gone beyond saving. I had taken this shop from nothing once before. I knew the way back. Claire came in from San Antonio around 4 o'clock. Let herself in through the side door, still had Nadine's spare key. Found me in the back office with the November light lying across the floor at that low, raking angle it takes late in the year, longer and more deliberate than the light of October. She dropped into the chair Hal had been using. We didn't feel a need to fill the silence. We'd made our peace with that over the 3 weeks just past. The silences that needed no filling, the quiet companionship of sharing a room while the afternoon shifted around us. After a while, I began talking about Nadine. Not about the illness, not about the last year. About the Tuesday afternoons when Claire was small and Pamela was smaller, when Nadine used to bring them both by the shop after school. The two girls would perch on the workbench eating crackers, while Nadine graded papers at the corner of my desk, and a radio station played old blues music, and the light fell through the window at exactly this angle. Claire listened without stirring. Pamela used to fall asleep on the workbench, I said every single time. Didn't matter what kind of noise surrounded her. She'd put her head down and be gone inside of 10 minutes. Claire smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen from her in weeks. Not the managed expressions she had been holding in place since the morning she arrived at my door in the dark with a canvas tote and her mother's spare key. This one reached her eyes and held there, and it carried relief and grief and something close to peace, all three at once. We stayed until the light had left and the shop settled into quiet around us. I got home a little before 8 o'clock. The house was warm and still. I brewed coffee I didn't need, but wanted anyway, carried it to the living room, and settled into the chair across from the fireplace. Nadine's photograph was on the wall to my left, the one from the summer we drove out to Colorado. Both of us at the edge of something high with a valley spread out behind us. Nadine laughing at something I'd just said that I can no longer call back to mind. I had studied that photograph so many times over 3 years that I sometimes thought I had stopped truly seeing it, only registering its shape, the space it held on the wall. Tonight, I was seeing it. "I think I finally understand what you meant," I said, not out loud, just in the way you speak towards someone who isn't in the room, but hasn't fully left it either. About showing up. About being present even when it's hard. Especially when it's the hardest it's ever been. I held the cup in both hands and looked at her face, the laugh still arriving, the valley green behind her, the sky that unmistakable Colorado blue. Then my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Pamela. I let it ring once, then twice, not out of hesitation. I was making sure I was choosing rather than simply reacting. There is a difference between those two things, and it mattered to me to know which one this was. I was choosing. I picked up. I didn't know what the road ahead looked like for the two of us. I didn't know whether we would ever sit across from each other and feel the space between us narrow into something livable. I didn't know if the word normal would ever carry the same meaning again between us, or whether it even ought to. Those were questions for later, for the slow, uncertain work of months and years ahead. What I knew in the moment, I pressed the phone to my ear and spoke her name, was something simpler than all of that. I was her father. She was my daughter. Nadine had written in a letter sealed and set aside. For a moment she would not live to see that Pamela would need her father most when she was most lost, and that I should not leave her to face that alone. She was lost. I was here. I had answered not because I had finished grieving or resolved anything into something clean or figured out yet how to talk to her. I answered because a family is not assembled from the easy moments. It is built from the moments when you choose to stay, when staying is the harder thing. When you aren't ready. When you aren't sure you have enough left. I had made that choice. That was enough to start from. My name is Eugene Hartwell. I am 67 years old. I own an auto repair shop in Pearland, Texas, and for 4 months I was being slowly poisoned by someone I had welcomed into my family. I don't share this looking for sympathy. I share it because the warning signs were present long before I was willing to face them, and someone else might be living inside a version of this right now. Don't confuse a person's patience with their goodwill. Don't assume that a calm voice means the person using it means you no good. Don't let gratitude towards someone cloud what is actually unfolding inside your own walls. I thanked my daughter every week for the coffee she brought and left in my refrigerator. I said thank you, while it was slowly taking my own name from me. The lesson I carry out of all of this is not about betrayal. It is about presence. Nadine understood something I had to learn, the painful way that showing up for the people you love, particularly when it is painful, particularly when you are not yet ready, is the only thing that holds a family together when everything else has broken loose. I came close to losing my business, my health, and my daughter inside the same season. What I did not lose was the capacity to choose to stay. There are moments when the right person appears at exactly the right time. Claire knocked on my door at 6 o'clock in the morning, carrying her mother's spare key and a bag full of evidence she had gathered without being asked. I hadn't called her. She simply came. That is what love looks like when it stops being a feeling and becomes a decision. These are the kinds of stories that don't surface at holiday tables. They happen quietly behind closed doors in the gap between trust and the assumptions we don't examine. If someone you care about seems to be retreating behind closed doors, pay attention. Ask the questions that feel uncomfortable before you have reason to ask them. Show up before you feel needed, because by the time it feels urgent, time has often already run out. What I learned through all of this is that a family is not built from the easy moments. It is built from the moments when you decide to remain, when you are worn out, when you are not ready, when the door between you and someone you love has grown too heavy and you push it open anyway. I pushed it open. That was enough to begin. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this story, I want to thank you. That means something to me more than I can easily say. I came close to losing everything. In the same season, my health, my business, my daughter. What I didn't lose was the clarity that came after. I believe God places the right people at exactly the right moment. And Claire showing up at my door before dawn with her mother's key was not an accident. It was the moment the tide turned. What this cost me was trust, the deep-settled kind you build over decades. What it taught me was that love is not a feeling you wait on. It is a decision you make again and again, especially when it is hardest. If I could leave you with anything from this story, it would be this. Pay attention when someone else's patience never wavers. Real kindness has texture. Control wears patience like a mask. Don't let gratitude blind you to what is happening inside your own home. Saying thank you is not the same as paying attention. If someone you love begins to drift behind closed doors, show up before you are asked. By the time it feels urgent, time has often already run short. And when the door between you and someone you love feels too heavy, push it open anyway. That is where family is either lost or found. This is the kind of story that rarely makes it to the holiday table. These are the grandpa stories that get carried in silence alone. If this family revenge story stayed with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me what you would have done if you had been sitting where I was sitting. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to Calm Family Revenge. There are more stories here that deserve to be told. Thank you for walking this road with me. Take good care of yourself and of the people you love.